Hey everyone, and welcome to your Java tutorial on static variables. So as you can see, I have Visual Studio Code pulled up here and our main program or our app program ready to go, or just our example program. We have our Hello World instruction here. And we have our person class down here. And so I've kind of stripped the person class down to just one member variable for the purposes of this example. And so just a little bit of review here. I'm going to create a person object. We're going to call it Pete, and we're going to set it equal to a new person, as we do to create a new object. And I'm going to access this variable. We're going to say first name is equal to, and we'll say Peter. I'm going to create another one as well, another person. We'll call him Tom. We'll set it equal to a new person. We'll access Tom's first name and set it equal to Thomas. And we can go down here and we'll do a system.out.println. And we're going to say Tom's first name. And we will say Tom.firstname. And we're going to do the same for Pete here. Here we go. And if we run it, we'll see Tom's first name, Thomas, Pete's first name, Peter. And now how this is working is we're using our class here to create an object named Pete, and we're accessing a member variable on the level of the object, right? So each object gets its own copy of the first name member variable, and we're setting those copies to different values. And this member variable exists in this object, right? Not in the type, because the type is a blueprint, right? The type creates the object, and this member variable exists in that object. Now, static variables are a little bit different because static variables exist on the level of the class. So if we create a static variable here, we create a public static string, and we call it last name. Now this last name variable exists on the level of the class. And what that means is that we don't need to instantiate an object, right? So this new keyword followed by the type here, this is accessing what's called a constructor, and we'll get into that later. But what this is doing is this is returning a new person object and storing it in this variable name. Using this variable or this object, we're accessing the member variable that's different. Now, to access our static variable, all we have to do is we access the person class directly, and we have access to the last name. So here we are accessing the person class directly and accessing this last name, and we're sending it to Grappentine, which is my last name. So now what happens if we try to, using the Pete object, if we try to access last name and set it to something else, the static field person.last name should be accessed in a static way, right? It's telling us, hey, don't access it through an object, access it through the actual class. So what this means is that last name, since it exists on the level of the class, is the same for every instance of the class. If we change last name, it changes it for every instance of the class because it's static, right? If we change last name, we change it for every instance because it's static. If we change first name, it only changes it for that particular object, right? So in this example, Pete's first name is Peter. Tom's first name is Thomas. However, both of their last name is Grappentine, right? So one member variable exists on the level of the object, right? You need to create an object in order to access that member variable, and that's first name. You need to create an object to access first name. For last name, since it exists on the level of the class, You just access it directly using the class name. And so if we print it out, print line, we can print out, we create a string here and we'll say person's last name. And we will say person with a capital P, last name. There you have it. Let's run it. And you can see Tom's first name, Thomas, Pete's first name, Peter, person's last name, Grappentine. So that's your tutorial on static variables. They are variables that exist on the level of the class. So there's only one of them per class, whereas with a regular member variable, you get one of those per instance of the object. So every time you create an object, you get a new first name, but you have access to the same last name, and there's only one copy of that versus the many copies of first name. So if you remember back to our lesson on objects versus classes, you can have one class and many objects, right? So it's a one-to-many relationship. A static variable you can only have one of. Or, I could create multiple static variables, but they're all going to be, you'll only get one copy of them per class, right? Whereas you get many copies of the regular member variables here for first name. So that's your lesson on static variables in Java. Maybe you learned something. Thanks.